Welcome to the Keiser Education Series. My name is Gabe Derman, and I'm a Human Performance and Education Specialist at Keiser. I'll be moderating today's panel alongside my teammate, Mike Compton. Today's discussion is centered around the applications of training for baseball players. With spring training and the beginning of the college baseball season on the horizon, we brought together a panel of human performance practitioners that have a wealth of experience in the field of strength conditioning, and especially within the game of baseball. Our first panelist is Coach Brandon Golden. Brandon is a performance coach at 5 Tool Connection. His resume is impressive, and it's no secret he enjoys being around the game of baseball. Brandon has held performance titles at a number of institutions, highlighted by serving as strength conditioning coach for Collegiate USA Baseball, the East Carolina University Men's Baseball Program, and performance coach for the Los Angeles Dodgers organization. He also serves as adjunct professor of kinesiology at LaSalle University. Our second panelist is Coach Ryan Tibbets. Ryan is the Assistant Director of Performance Science with an emphasis on athlete availability for the Milwaukee Brewers. He oversees all components regarding physiological readiness, external workload, and athletic capacity. Before joining the Brewers, he spent 3 seasons serving as strength conditioning coach for the Baylor Bears men's baseball program. He also spent 3 years with Stanford University Sports Performance Department, where he worked with multiple sports and was part of 2 national championship winning programs. Our third panelist is Coach Isaac Salazar. Isaac is entering his 2nd year with the Brewers as Director of Strength Conditioning, where he serves to support strength conditioning as well as performance nutrition initiatives across all levels of the Brewers system. Prior to this position, he spent over 9 years as the Director of Strength Conditioning at Cal State Fullerton. Other performance stops include Assistant Strength Conditioning Coach with the Boris Corporation, UC Irvine, and minor league strength conditioning for the Los Angeles Angels. We're ready to talk training soon, but I have to take a moment to acknowledge and appreciate the people on this panel. When I was a strength conditioning coach at the University of Washington, I sat in the opposing dugout from all 3 of you, and all 3 of you in the same season we were just catching up on. Brandon brought his guys into the weight room in Seattle. I brought my guys to Fullerton twice, where Isaac and his staff graciously hosted us. And Ryan, we traded off home field advantage in our 2 years there. So being with you guys today is really awesome. I appreciate that at the time, everybody was really welcoming and eager to connect and learn from one another, which is the exact spirit of the Keiser Education Series. So we're going to get into it. I'm going to start with Isaac. Isaac, what's going on? How you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having us, and thanks for including us in consideration for this. This is awesome.
Of course. And Brandon, how are you doing?
Good, man. Thanks for setting this up, guys. This is awesome.
Of course. And then last we go over to Ryan. Ryan, what's up?
All good on my end. I'm glad to be a part of this.
Okay. Well, we're ready to talk baseball, so let's do it. And we're going to start fairly general with our first question, and then hopefully get more granular once you've each had a chance to answer. In performance, we can all appreciate the need for assessment. And Brandon, I'm going to start with you on this one, and then go to Isaac next. And then Ryan, you'll have a chance to answer if you'd like as well. From a musculoskeletal approach, what assessments have you identified as important for your understanding of the individual and the subsequent prescription of training and programming?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's one that everybody wants to talk about, and everybody wants like the secret answer. Like, is it FMS? Is it on base U? Like, what is it? Like, what's the movement screen that's gonna make your players go do the things that they need to do? But what we've developed, and what the guys with 5 Tool Connection have developed, like, it's a very simplistic model of like the joint by joint approach. Like, how do your ankles move? How does the pelvis move? How does the thoracic how does the T-spine move? Like, how does everything move? Like, how do those segments move together, but also like independently? And what we've done a good job of is just making things as general as possible, like very general movement patterns, to then be able to go pair up into this, super complex movement. It's the delivery of the swing. So, I don't want to talk too much. I want these other smart guys to be able to get a chance to say, but like, I think the big thing for me personally is like understanding like how do the ankles work, and then like how is the pelvis working and or not working together. If you get those 2 things, you can kind of like piece things together pretty well. So I'll let these guys jump in and comment on that.
Sure. And you mentioned ankles and then pelvis, so it sounds like a little bit of a ground up approach with your approach to assessments. Isaac, I'm going to go over to you here and give you a chance. What assessments have you identified with the Brewers or in your experience in baseball over a long period of time that are important?
I think like a global approach, if we boil it down, that can be accessible anywhere with any program team. Simplistically finding out like how strong our athletes are, whatever those KPIs are for you, whatever tools you have to evaluate those, and how powerful they are. and there's lots of ways to do it. You can do it with minimal resources. You can do it with tons of tech. When you get into professional baseball and you're working on multiple coaches across a lot of levels, we get to be a little more strategic with those things, a little more targeted. But finding an idea to track and measure whether your programming is working for the subsequent goal is super important. And then ultimately we're in the injury prevention strategy. So within that context, just making sure that we identify the things that are most necessary to limit from overuse or pattern overload injury, and how can we insulate an athlete for durability in that regard too. So going back to the things that Brandon looks into from a movement and a joint by joint approach is super important. There's a ton of ways to cut it up, but those would be like a staple across any platform, any sport, and any tools that you have. So I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, and Ryan, you have a unique title that I was reading was athlete availability and assistant performance science director for athlete availability. So talk a little bit about that, your role there, and then also for you within the Brewers organization as well. What kind of assessments or things that are important for you and the Brewers, and maybe echoing some of the things that Isaac said there.
Yeah, so really just to kind of get into my position, it's rather unique in that I get to be mostly a supporting cast member to a lot of our strength and conditioning coaches and our player health, so our medical staff as well, and just kind of being a bridge there to make sure the processes that we have in place to have the best scientific backing behind it. So like the empirical knowledge, kind of being able to provide that to all of our coaches and just help them with their decision-making process and understanding, hey, here's the assessments that we chose, here's why we do them, and here's how they get used. So using that as a segue into the question, I think an interesting piece in the assessment part for me, sure, as an athlete intake perspective, you want to take that more global approach, and let's just see if we can get as much information and data on a guy as we can to serve as a baseline for inevitably, like as much as we try to mitigate the injury risk, it's probably going to happen through an athlete's career. So as long as we have a baseline that we can compare to when trying to get a guy back to the point, and hopefully even better, to a point where he can go back and compete on the field. I think from a global approach, like that's what we try to do is we take athletes in, but then ultimately the game itself is going to be your biggest screening tool. So for the coaches that have been around the sport for a long time, like you kind of have that coach's eye when you're watching either a pitcher's delivery or a player's swing, or even just some of the basic things of like a shortstop fielding the ball and then getting it over to first base. Like you just kind of see some things. You're like, hey, that looks a little weird. Maybe I want to dive into that a little bit deeper. So being able to look at a guy's performance on the field, I think, is our biggest catalyst for the reason of why we would dive in a little bit deeper into looking at some of these assessments and tools. And, if it doesn't impact a guy on the field of play, then why are we really doing it? Like if a guy's table test shows, oh yeah, you've got some limited IR on your shoulder and, hip external range of motion is a little funky, but on the mound, like you're out there and you can go out there and shove and you don't seem to have any problems with it, then I'm probably not going to worry about that too much. And then from, all your biomotor capabilities that we're tracking just to make sure that we're seeing progress and trends for a guy in their speed, power, strength, and, our kind of normative ranges and acceptable values for what we're having for those different positions, kind of building those out and just saying, here's kind of the range, but you're always going to have your outliers. And we never want to pigeonhole a guy to say, we want to bring you to average, because an average baseball player doesn't get very far. It's always your outliers that kind of make it to the highest levels. But being able to know where they are, have a plan in place to get them to that next point that we're trying to see from a progression perspective, and just mapping out that plan, I think is the way that we would try to use all of our assessments.
Yeah, that's cool. It sounds like in your role, you have a little bit of mobility from level to level and a fresh set of eyes, and to be a resource for a lot of those other coaches who are kind of in the thick of things from game to game, which we all know can be a little bit of a beast. Isaac, you mentioned a little bit about tech and the use of tech. So I want to dive into that a little bit. Is there anything off the top of your head right now that you're utilizing or tools you're utilizing from a tech standpoint with the Brewers that are useful?
We went from not being able to strategically measure progress and found lots of ways to collaborate through all of our different levels with limited resources. Coming into this second year, or coming into the first year, Ryan and I worked together to create a roadmap for how to do it responsibly and efficiently and really hammer the basics really well, instead of being saturated by all of the opportunities that tech can kind of provide for you. So, ultimately we rely on the eyes, the strategies, the implementation, and the relationships that our coaches have with their players. And then we use the tools that we have to help guide the decisions or confirm the decisions that they're making on the day-to-day basis, whether the program that they're putting together is working or whether there's some adjustments that they can make to course correct some of the things that they see with some of the strategies and experiences that they have. We went from not being able to track sets and reps globally to putting it into an athlete strength and conditioning software. We went from finding proxy ways to evaluate strength and power to being able to do that with portable force plate opportunities. And then we look for ways to drive intent in training with giving athletes really good feedback and awareness on the interest set recommendation, the results from training through accelerometer work, through linear transducer work, something that provides player-facing feedback for confirmation that the training is going in the direction that we feel is productive, and then also to drive or elicit the response that we're hoping to get. Activate high threshold motor units, encourage strength and power development, which is awesome. Help tailor the training to be as simple as possible with the basics that we want to put together in front of the athletes. So there are tons of competitors in that space. We found some that help facilitate our deliberate needs. Ryan is the conduit for those things. His expertise is emotional intelligence, his ability to communicate down from his strength conditioning experience and his scientific experience is super helpful to help speed up all of our coaches to be able to execute a plan and also be able to execute their own recipe for training and success there too.
Yeah, that's great insight. So I appreciate that. And we'll talk a little bit later about power and the types of things that we're doing to work on power and to help develop power with our baseball athletes. Brandon, I'm just going to give you a quick chance to answer that one as well in terms on the tech side of things and assessments for a new athlete, new baseball player that you're getting in over there with you. What types of assessments are you doing? What kind of tech are you utilizing to help give you better information to drive decision?
Yeah, I was actually just got back to the house from Wake Forest. I was over there working with their guys. We have a partnership with them where we're doing some movement screens and we're doing like pre-swing, pre-throw stuff. They have a great strength and conditioning coach and a great medical staff over there. So we're just trying to help out a little bit on our end. But basically the reason I bring that up is because, I was just over there and we were using Output Sports. So basically what that does, it's kind of similar to a lot of things that Isaac was just talking about, but I'm able to lay guys down on their back, do a straight leg raise, see how their pelvis dissociates from itself, have them on their back, do external rotation of the pelvis, of the hip, internal rotation, shoulder, T-spine rotation. And, a lot of the on-base a lot of like these measurements and things that we've all used before that were super subjective. And, people are looking like side to side, like, hey, does it look like he can get his pelvis or what? And people are like, yeah, like, yes, no. But, now we have a very objective number to, you're either within the threshold of a quality number from an external rotation standpoint, or you have an opportunity to get better at some of those things. So Output Sports has been huge for us. We can do the RSI, we can do med ball slams, we can do the VBT stuff like Isaac was talking about. So anything that I need to do, I can toss it in my bag and I can do it. And I'm actually going to Isaac's old stomping grounds here next week to visit my boy out at Fullerton. So I'll be taking that with me and then using it again. And it's something that's very simplistic again. And like, I don't want to jump the gun and get into the power stuff, but like kind of going back to what you were just talking, like what we're talking about with our movement screens and things like that. Like Ryan hit on it. We can all see that stuff. Like we can all sit there and look like, hey, this guy can get into his back hip and he throws 100. Like, yeah, there's something good there. But like as performance coaches, being able to identify what that good is and what makes that individual, that outlier to your point, like that's what we're trying to accomplish. And what we found is you can do some very, very general things and make them super complex. And then you can take the complex, which is the pitching, delivery, of the swing, and make it super general. And then that's how it intertwines. And that's where the magic happens. And like, to me, that's why I've always stuck around the game of baseball, is that art of it. And that's the fun part for me. So Output Sports is probably our big piece of technology we're using right now.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate everyone's feedback on that. And it's a nice segue into the next question, which is, baseball is a very unique sport in that the throwing motion is so violent and the movement's so specific, and it's done just over and over and over again. And shoulder health is obviously one of the most talked about baseball training topics. All three of you have alluded to shoulder health being more global and not just specifically the shoulder, but there are a lot of things you have to appreciate in terms of shoulder health. So when we look at things that are red flags potentially, and Brandon, you had just mentioned, okay, we have our outliers, but if we were to bucket a bunch of athletes immediately and say, hey, here are some things that are really important to us, we're going to do this assessment. Shoulder health is super important. The coaching staff says we want the healthiest shoulders this year. What are some things that all three of you can identify as, hey, these are like major red flags for us if this does not look good?
Yeah.
Kind of fill in the blank, and I'll go to Brandon and then let the other two have a chance to answer as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is how do things function in a very controlled environment? So like taking the whole assessment, it's like we'll look at ankle mobility in the sagittal plane. All right, if they pass that, then we're going to ankle mobility and or stability in the frontal plane. And if there's an issue there, like just going up the chain. So like, do they have the ability to, as soon as that foot picks up, what's happening? So if they don't have the mobility and or stability in that ankle, there's going to be a disaster somewhere, and it's going to just go up the chain. So you look at that, then you attack that first, you clean up the ankle, you allow it to do what it's made to do and function properly. And then another one for me is, the straight leg raise and being able to see, like, does the pelvis disassociate? Can they load it? Can they get into external rotation in IR and that backside load? Can they get into, basically from a hitting and pitching standpoint, like, can they get into their hips and can they get out? And if they can't, then there's going to be some type of lag and or some type of compensation. That's either going to put that shoulder or elbow in a compromised position, because the torque and the force is still coming up the body. It's just like, how do they re-accept that and where do they generate it and allow it to come out of their hand? So that's, I think, the biggest thing for us is like being able to take a very simplistic look at it and say, okay, do the ankles work properly? Can they control their pelvis? Can they control their T-spine? Like, where's all this stuff coming from? And if there is some metric, kind of like Ryan was talking about earlier, like, hey, well, they're up there doing their thing and it's good, like, that's awesome. Like, yeah, we don't want to go mess with that. Like, we've all seen, everybody on here seen, like, some of the most unbelievable athletes in the world that have the worst movement screens possible. And like, we're not going to go out there and fix them, or we're not going to have jobs. But like, at the same point in time, it's like, okay, like, if something doesn't work properly, or could we take an external rotation of the hip, of the right hip, if it's a right-handed thrower, from 13 degrees to 20 degrees? That we can all agree that's still bad. I mean, that's still not good, but like, it's allowing that athlete to just be slightly better. So maybe they're not in a compromised position where that shoulder is going to be a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I give Isaac and Ryan, Mike and I are from another organization. We just got traded for, gumballs and a few bats, because that's the quality of players that we are. But now we're coming into your organization, and it's your chance to get your hands on us and look at some assessments or identify some things that early on might be like super red flags for you, or things that you may want to avoid. What does that look like for the two of you within the Brewers organization?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. Like, we have a really good collaborative environment with our medical team that has a thorough orthopedic assessment, and they rely on similar things to track and measure progress over time when it comes to shoulder strength, and have some confidence numbers in how well the shoulder can slow down as much as it can speed up, both in from a mobility and a stability standpoint, and some strength measures and confidences around those two to give us a picture of kind of the foundation that we're walking into. When we get into the gym and we're going to organize training globally, most of our athletes aren't very good overhead. They tend to be really restricted in the lat, the pec minor. There's a lot of tools that we try to incorporate in our general prep phases for resetting the joints, and then training in really good ranges of motion, and expressing strength in all different angles and ranges of motion, from overhead all the way down to all the different permutations of extension, and then be really, really good at progressions if we have the opportunity for chin up and other really good scapular protraction and retraction exercise selection that elicits like a high motor pull. With that being said, like, cleaning up those things initially, having an idea of what those movement restrictions are, allows us to create a really robust plan to insulate the joint to be really strong and capable, so that we can beat it up during the general preparation phase, and then have it more prepared to elicit force and accept force in their day to day. There's always a general understanding, like whatever that there's a lot of different workload normatives from all these different athletes. Their bands of what they're used to is different from athlete to athlete, and just understanding, from the skill perspective and the training perspective, have a really good lens of what that looks like. And we rely on people like who are experts in the area, like Ryan, to help guide those decisions as well. But that's how we would hope to create principles off of training paradigms for how to handle some of the things that cost us more from time lost on the field, both from the pitcher's perspective and find ways to do that for our position players as well.
Yeah, thank you. And then Ryan, just want to make sure, give you the chance if there's anything you want to throw on top of that.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add there is just trying to get an understanding of what that athlete's injury history is, because that's going to drive a lot of what the interventions that we probably need to take place, or understanding the mechanisms behind those injuries and trying to identify what those pieces were, like Brandon talked about, with understanding, what's the function of the ankle, what's the function of the hip, what's the function of the shoulder, and then just saying, like, is it a physical capacity perspective, or potentially like a loss of capability within that joint range of motion, or is it simply just a misappropriation of workload, and he may have just had too quick of a ramp up period, or maybe his workload spiked because another injury happened to another player, and now this guy's got to take up the slack. So just trying to dive into that a little bit deeper can help with the approach of how we're going to treat this athlete from a year to year, season to season, and even just like from the micro scale of what we're going to put in place for that guy.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And we kind of focused a little bit on that scap and that shoulder health, but we all know on this call right now is that it's just more than that, piecing it together, whether you're throwing or hitting. So another topic of conversation in the sport of baseball is the idea of having structural balance. So like biomechanically, baseball is a very one-sided sport, regardless if you're, swinging or throwing. Isaac, I'm going to come to you. So with this in mind, I'm curious to know what having structural balance means to you, and how much value you place on it. Is it important for performance, or is it a little bit more of that injury risk? How do you merge the two, and how do you separate them?
Yeah, I mean, my background is in the Poliquin methodology, and he was the one that kind of was the pioneer of using training data over a ton of different athletes back in the 90s to create some normative values on primary lifts and the relationships of their agonists, antagonists, and their synergists, and how to really properly prescribe load and see relationships and performance and a mechanism for that. So I really like using that strategy in general preparation, and really like using that strategy to find out what our athletes aren't good at, and building up those weak points. You might not, from a training perspective, you might not get close to those 100% ratios of or level of comfort in relation to like squat, back squat, front squat, or front squat, back squat, and deadlift performance. Same with like all your presses, your chin up performance, your rotator cuff strength performance. But as we get better at those and identify those, then our athlete is built for success. And as we get better at training quality and range of motion, then our permanency from a mobility and stability state perspective is better served long term. So I like using that methodology when we're talking about structural balance to things that we can control as strength and conditioning professionals. Like we can control those things, we can identify those things, and the game is just going to elicit biases in those on those dominant sides, and what we tend to try to do is reset everything in our general preparation phase, use those good strategies and principles for training, get really good feedback on the performance by tracking it and tracking what we're doing in the gym, tracking our performance in the gym, and making relationships on where the gaps are as our athletes are training, and just make sure there's no blind spots in our programming decisions, implementation strategies, and vice versa. So that's a little harder to replicate across like 14 coaches, but having the understanding of like thinking that way, identifying strategies that way, building up weak links like that's going to insulate us across the board. That's one methodology. That's one I'm really, really exposed to and passionate about and seen really great results. And I think it's translative to any sport. And comes from really good coaching, driving good technique, and following good principles of training.
Now, with that being said, like, does that transition between, you talked about general preparation, prep and whatnot. So does that change in your in-season then? Like, are you focusing on?
I would still organize the training in relationship to making sure that we have adherence to those things. And there's probably more responsible exercise selection and decisions and economy of training as it relates to in-season methods, and finding opportunity to keep lean tissue on, muscle mass on, still find ways to elicit durability in the joint, proper exposures and dosages of the prescription. Yeah, that's really, really important. You probably have less variability economy inside of your exercise selection as you get into season. If you do a really good job with your preparation and your learning, then your training menu and your economy definitely grows, and the weapons that you have available are better. But some of the restrictions that we have is we only get to see these guys in season. So being really, really alert to where those gaps are and opportunities to provide really good instruction and to build up some weak links are important to consider too. Globally, front rack loading is super important for us. If we're going to elicit a strength response because of efficiency, economy, or just being able to load easier in season with partial ranges of motion, just making sure that we're really deliberate on exposures to full range of motion when we can, making sure there's balance in our program between agonists, antagonists, synergists, and making sure that we have opportunity to keep rep ranges that elicit some lean tissue throughout the week too. That's how we kind of try to see it as being efficient within possibly 2 30-minute sessions a week. Sometimes you get more, lots of times you get way less. And in the facilities that we have, being really strategic and really flexible with some of those strategies are important too. We're getting better as an organization with resources, facilities, and hardware that allows us to make better decisions and provide better economy for our players too.
Awesome. Really good detail there. And I'm going to bring Ryan into the mix just because you guys are in the same organization. So when we talk about availability in your role and basically being that facilitator up and down the chain, let's just talk sport coach, baseball coach to your performance coach to yourself and so on. There's so many different hats. No pun intended, baseball, but are you taking those imbalances potentially? Let's say a guy is unavailable from a physiological standpoint. Are you going back down and saying, hey, we recognize this imbalance, like we're seeing it start to, or trend down as the season progresses? Maybe he's fatiguing in a certain sense. Like, how are you handling that information and then communicating amongst others within the organization to make sure that he's ready to rock through that long season?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point to bring up. And one of the things that we're currently working to improve upon now is getting all of the different data points from each of these different departments into a more centralized hub that we can bring all those stakeholders to the table. So then if we do identify like these negative patterns or trends of change, whether it's positive or negative, then we can have further discussions. And then it just really what it does is it raises the flag and kind of alerts us to maybe not say like this is a red, yellow, or a green flag. We just notice there is some sort of change. Is it warranting a response from our S&C coaches, from our player health staff, from our player development staff? Just being able to kind of go to the department that is the closest to what is identified as whatever the problem is at the time, to be able to give them an opportunity to say, what are you seeing from your side? Okay, here's what our player development staff is seeing. This is also what we're seeing from our S&C coaches from like the physiological structures. There may be some strength changes in a guy's manual muscle test from his shoulder ER to IR ratio. maybe that could be contributing to either a loss of velo or potentially why his fastball's flattening out. And now he's starting to get hit a lot more because he doesn't have that movement potential there as well. So yeah, just being able to have those connections and bringing all of the stakeholders to the table so we can actually discuss the best appropriate plan of action for this guy is really kind of what my job helps facilitate those conversations.
Nice. That's awesome. And just everybody being on the same page, which it sounds like you guys are progressing in a positive sense within the organization. Brandon, I want to touch on kind of your perspective. I know you've been with some world-class organizations with USA Baseball, Los Angeles Dodgers, ECU, like really good baseball organizations, but I want to hear your perspective because now you're kind of working with people who are, or you're a little bit separated from the organizations. So is it, hey, I'm doing the best I possibly can, getting these baseball players prepped and primed for the season, and then, so be it, or you continue that conversation with, let's say, a high school athlete compared to a college, like, hey, how do I know if they're having issues, they're starting to, maybe fatigue throughout the season? How are you helping them from that structural balance per se, or maybe not at all?
Yeah, no, that's great, Mike. And it's one that, we continue to have like the conversations. Like I got a couple guys, here that I'm training, that, I'm talking to their coaches, and nothing really changes in the fact that it's like, okay, what's the goal for this individual? And the goal from the sports side of things, the baseball side of things, is always going to drive what we do because we're a support to what they're doing out there on the field. So just having those conversations, like, okay, what does X player need to be the best possible version of himself and to succeed at the highest level within whatever organization that is, whether it's a college or a high school player or whatever the case may be. Like having those conversations, and then like having the trust of a 16-year-old kid who's going to go to one of the best colleges in the country, who's probably going to be a first-round pick. Like everybody's been telling him how good he is, and he's going to walk in here in a second, but everybody's been telling him how good he is his whole life. And it's like, okay, that's all well and good, but like, how does he trust me as a person? And like, and the telltale sign, and all of you guys can appreciate this, it's like, all right, dude, take a knee and hand me your arm. And they hand you their arm like this. Like when they just give us their arms like that, you have them, there's a relationship there. And, to me, that's the biggest thing, is like, how can I make a relationship with that player so that then I can go have conversations with their coaches, with their trainers, their strength coaches, whoever the people are that are touching these guys, to have that positive influence. And as far as like the structural balance stuff goes, like, I think to me, it just goes back to like, and this is what I think of, and like, this is going to be a little bit different answer than Isaac gave. Like, it just goes to like, what do they need? Like, what exactly do they need? Like, there'd be times where I was East Carolina, it's like, all right, everybody's doing ankle mobility, everybody's doing hip mobility, and everybody's going to do T-spine rotations. Okay, that's cool. Well, I got some guys that need T-spine stability. So if I'm cranking into T-spine mobility, like, am I making them worse? Like, yeah, I am. And I did that. So like having the ability to understand, like, what are some of the things that like need to take place, and like, what are the specifics? Like, all 5 of us on here, like, we all have right ankles. All right. But we all might need like right ankle mobility, right ankle stability, like various planes of motion. So like being very specific in their prep work and within the routine of like, if this isn't going to help make them a better baseball player, like, then we're not doing it. We're not wasting their time. Like, we're not taking the resources. Like, we're going to get them to a place that they need to be. And, that's not necessarily like the definition of the structural balance stuff in the way that Isaac was talking about. But like when he was speaking, like, that's what it made me think of. It's like, how can I help this kid that just walked in the door be the best version of himself and make it to where he can, do everything that he wants to do. And it's play baseball at a high level. So that's what I got on that.
One quick follow-up on that, Brandon.
Yeah.
So like, how often are you like objectifying? Like, hey, all right, he needs more thoracic stability. I get that. But like, is it a 4-week thing? Like, how do you know what you're doing is working in order to, keep progressing where they need to be?
Yeah, we test range of motion stuff, at least once a month, depending on like who it is. Like Johnny over here likes to get going a little bit more, so he wants a little bit more information. They do their jumps once a week, all that good stuff, all their lower body power output stuff, have med ball slams. That's the cool thing about the output. Like, we can be training and say, hey, where's this at? Like, all right, well, go hit your movement and then come over. Let's strap this thing up and let's see where your T-spine rotation is. Like, has it improved? Like, no, it hasn't. Not at the rate that we hoped it had. Like, okay, let's get on that. And these guys are a little bit younger than some of the guys I've had in the past, but like they're just as competitive, if not more at times. So like that's the big thing is making sure that you're giving them that information and you're not just testing. And it's like, all right, well, we'll see, we'll see what happens down the road. But Also like empowering them to like, I kind of like talk crap to them, for lack of better words, like, hey, this is your career. Like I learned that with the Dodgers. Carl, one of my coordinator, taught me that. He said, hey, it's their career. Like if they don't want to do it, like whatever. Like, and it's not the thought process of like we don't care, but it's like just giving that little nudge of like, hey man, like we're here to support you. And that's what, the Dodgers organization, in my opinion, and this is a very skewed opinion because I've only worked with one professional team, does the best out of anybody, is like they're able to wrap their arms around them because there's so many arms, and be able to say like, hey, here's the avenue you could go, but like if you don't want to go there, like come back to us and we'll have that conversation with you. With Five Tool Connection, like we are people that are super passionate about our families, our kids, like what we're doing, and we're able to take that and like put it into what we do here on a daily basis. Like this facility right here is in my backyard. Like my kids are 200 yards that way. So like we're able to do things at a super high level to pour into these people.
Well, it helps when you're in the country. Don't you do agility work with like chasing chickens?
Well, I would, but my man over here is scared of chickens. So I told him if he wants to go get some eggs, he can have them whenever he wants. But Hudson, my son Hudson's 5, and my youngest one Carson is 2, and yeah, they go snag them boys up anytime they get out of the pen and toss them back in. So
Love
little
it.
Rocky running around out here.
Awesome. Anything else to add from like a structural balance perspective before we kind of carry on?
I just wanted to echo what Brandon was saying. Like the success of these guys in their spaces with baseball is because they love the game, they appreciate the game, they appreciate the players, they educate the players, show the player the information in a really digestible way, so that the story is about them and how they're progressing and improving, and they're ultimately creating an environment and a culture that we think is productive to training. Like that's culture to me. I don't want to get on my pedestal or anything, but that's what culture is, and that's how you drive like really good training environments. So bottling that up and sharing that with young coaches who are on this on this feed and listening in, like that's how you're going to be successful and get to where they are, and that's how you're going to be successful and work with the population you want to be working with.
100%. Great input there, Isaac. I'm going to flick it over to Gabe to get into a little bit more of the training aspect and power.
Yeah, Brandon, just real quick, 2 things that resonated with me at least was, number one, admitting the mistakes that you made along the way. I was there too, year 1, same thing. Okay, 35 guys, especially the collegiate level, even 40, should all be doing the same thing. So getting out of your own way, admitting mistakes and putting your ego aside in that regard. And then number 2, everyone hit on it, is the education piece for the athletes is just huge. Allowing, educating allows them to then take ownership of that process. So let's talk a little bit about power. And we mentioned it before. Isaac, you had mentioned it. And then Ryan, you also talked about outliers versus average. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. When we look at baseball athletes, we see them come in all types of different shapes and sizes. It's really amazing. Some are elastic, some are whippy and some rely on strength, and some can just generate through velocity. Regardless, power is the king, right? Power is what's most important. So do you guys bucket your athletes based on velocity or strength capabilities? And I'm going to start with Ryan, because you had mentioned outliers and allowing outliers to do what they do really well, whether that's on the strength side or the velocity side, whether it's just a technique thing. How do you bring an athlete in, assess how they're generating power, and then allow them to continue to do that while also working on things that might help develop that?
Yeah, so I think to touch on what Brandon had brought up earlier, like that's kind of the art of being an S&C coach and really being able to program based off of what the individual needs are that you can identify from the assessments that hopefully you have to draw from as well. So I think from, like you brought up, the elastic type athlete. Well, to me, when I think of an elastic type athlete, like that's an individual who can not only produce a lot of force, but hopefully withstand the repeatability of that force, is because they're not relying on contractile properties to generate the force. So hopefully you would see that reflected in their delivery in the way, like, just for an example, we were talking about a guy earlier today on one of our teams who his arm like the recoil that you see from there, like there's just literally no tension. So you just know it's kind of free flowing, and he's not having to beat up his posterior cuff just because he's not working on decelerating his arm so much. He's just letting it kind of recoil and bounce back. So being able to see a guy do that just kind of gives us an indication of, hey, we might just need to let him kind of do what he does and just continue down that path, while sprinkling in a little bit of the things that Isaac was touching on from a structural balance perspective to increase the capability of the musculature, so he can handle and kind of insulate himself against those potential usage injuries that he may see if a guy jumps from the collegiate level, where there's only 50 some odd games in a season, to now he's coming to rookie ball or potentially A ball, and now he's got to go throw 100 innings in this next year. So what can we do to help get him to increase his longevity over it? And I will always say, from my perspective, like, I'm very much a generalist, and I'm just always going to work from like a proximal to distal approach, and just saying, what can we do proximally to help ensure that this guy can produce the force, both on a maximum, like, can we push the ceiling a little bit, but also raise the floor in conjunction with that, so that guy can have a longevity in career, and he's not going to take such a toll from a physiological perspective, just because we're always trying to push the needle forward, but not bringing those lagging points behind with us as well.
Yeah, thank you. And Isaac, you had mentioned the idea of implementing force plates with some of your athletes and using that to maybe look at some metrics and some abilities. Can you talk a little bit and elaborate a little bit on that in regards to bucketing your athletes or identifying the capabilities of your athletes?
Yeah, we use the counter movement jump to assess power. We have some position specific and pitcher specific tests to look at how reactive they are. And then we have an opportunity to look at a quick snapshot of how strong and powerful they are in a ratio to one another, to see what kind of biases they have, whether it's in the speed strength consideration or in the force production consideration. Are they a fast athlete that Brian was saying can produce and accept force quickly, or do they have to generate force with a lot of effort and time for that value to be high? In relation to development, and we look at development with the Brewers, like skill development, medical availability, and talent and availability being two things that we prioritize. We would hope that strength and conditioning serves a piece to identify a marker of, like, are they strong enough and powerful enough, and is it a skill solution that we need to work into? So there is opportunity to evaluate those things, whether it's from a biomechanical perspective, a motion capture perspective, whatever, and go down our checklist and say, like, he has the capability to express in a general sense all the things that we think are important to have the opportunity to do X or Y. There's no secret in Major League Baseball. It's velocity, it's output, it's exit velocity, it's fastball velocity that you pay for. So if we can develop that, I think, or have opportunity to say that we can help insulate that or have a component in the development process for that, then you're in a good spot. This gives us confirmation for a lot of athletes, whether that's something that we want to affect change initially, or whether that's something that we say, like, all right, we're confident in this roadmap for development, and maybe it's something on the sequencing side or the skill development side. I think that's pretty general without giving up too many industry secrets. Brian,
Yeah,
well,
thank you.
Brian will have to stop me if I'm oversharing.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning the appreciation for just skill acquisition and the importance of, hey, this might even just be a skill issue. I think can be overlooked oftentimes by coaches, but oftentimes by players as well.
Yeah, we'd love to think like the performance side solves everything. We would love to think like we serve a huge chunk in the development piece, and like for some people that ratio is like, maybe it's a 20% clip that we're helping improve their on-field performance. Some people it's like minimal 1%. But if we can educate the athlete on how to take care of themselves and provide longevity in their careers, like, that's a W.
Yeah, sounds like you have a nice lens over there with the Brewers. I know Ryan at least mentioned the coaching eye and just watching the sport and watching the guys. So mixing maybe some of the things you're seeing from the objective side of things with the measurements that you're doing and the force plates and other things you mentioned, and then just getting out there and watching them, you start to have a better understanding and better idea. So Brandon, I'll go over to you and make sure you get a chance for this. Anything related to bucketing your athletes in terms of the velocity side or strength capability side?
Yeah. So like we use all that stuff to be able to put them in the right position initially, to be able to see like, okay, again, what is going to allow them to get in the best position possible and to be able to go compete. We've had guys that just work on like neuromuscular coordination and like understanding where their body is in space, and I can go get them as strong as they want, but like if they're not able to, walk and chew gum, for lack of better terms, like they're not going to be able to go out there and pitch and compete at a high level. So being able to again educate them on the fact that, hey, you're doing this training routine so you can get in and you can again lay that foundation, so then we can go get you strong, we can get you powerful, and then we can do all the fun sexy stuff that everybody else wants to see. But like being able to control your body and like hammer out an iso split squat, hammer out a push-up hold, like all of those things, so we can literally like crawl and do all of that before we're trying to go sprint and really get to some of that more higher end velocity side of things.
There's also a psychological component that kind of comes into play there too, with especially the sport of baseball and how much routines and just having a guy having confidence when he goes out there, either on the mound or when he steps into the box. So sometimes it is just kind of catering to what the athlete likes to do, so they can go out there and just feel good about themselves, and then hopefully put themselves in a mental state where he can go and perform at the highest level.
Yeah, no doubt. Definitely agree there.
So we kind of touched on power and like from a holistic approach and the different types of athletes that we may get. So strength, power, et cetera. But what we do know as well with baseball, it's a very rotational sport. So with that being said, like, how are we defining rotational power? And then are we looking at it from any type of objective manner, assessments? And feel free to maybe even touch on like the difference between what you guys as performance coaches are looking for to maybe like a hitting and pitching coach and how they merge together. Ryan, I'd like to get your thought process, especially in the role that you're in. Like, what are you looking objectively, or first define maybe rotational power from your standpoint, and then how are you collecting it and then pushing forward?
Yeah, I think with the sport, with how much practice in like sport specific movements these guys get just within the sport themselves, and that's where I kind of touched on earlier, like my approach is very generalist from that section, is like these guys are going to go out and get 1,000+ swings a week, and sometimes a coach is going to come to us and be like, hey, his like back hip looks like he's kind of getting stuck and he can't really get through and clear his hips. Like, is there anything that we can do to replicate what we're doing within the weight room setting? And in my mind, I just always kind of think, like, going back to what Isaac said, like, is this a weight room problem that we have to solve, or is this just the skill acquisition piece? So I think to go back to some of the points that we made about the assessments, like what are the low-hanging fruit things that we can touch on that can hopefully increase like the movement capabilities themselves from a general perspective, and then hopefully bridge that into the skill acquisition of what these coaches are going to be asking them to do from a day-to-day basis. So I think that's where, you can try to get really fancy and really cute. And I've definitely been victim of this or guilty of this in my time as an S&C coach, trying to like mirror exactly the sporting movements within the weight room side of things, and realizing like there's just not that much return on investment with the work that these guys are doing on the field. And then I'm taking away some of my very limited time where I could be working on bigger things from like a strength, power, and speed perspective to try and like get this 1% better in this little thing that again may not be my solution to come up with. So from a rotational aspect, like, yes, we'll work on the med ball throws and get into that piece, and we can work on, I think Bill Miller does a really good job of this with being able to measure the different velocities at different weights and being able to put like a force velocity profile together from a rotational sense. So then you can kind of focus on speed, strength, speed realms, just taking the same concepts and applying it to the rotational capabilities of an athlete, I think is a big thing. But really just overall, can we get them stronger? Can we get them faster? Can we get them expressing power in all different phases of motion and all different planes? And that's going to hopefully translate to the skill component. If we can just hand over to our development coaches, this is the best possible athlete that I can create for you guys. We've molded this clay to what we can. It's your turn to finish it off and make it the best baseball player.
Honestly, I love your answer. I love the fact that you really, took a step back and, hey, we're performance coaches, and there's a difference between, training for performance and also training from a tactical, technical piece. And that's simply just not our role in most cases. And Brandon, I'm going to go to you, especially because, back at St. John's, we worked together. We spent many times sitting with the pitching coach and talking shop, and hey, what do we need to do on our end to merge, performance on the field as well as performance in the weight room, and what is their role and what is our role. So like a little bit of a left-hand turn here in regards to rotational power, but what communication have you seen over the years from that standpoint to making sure, hey, to piggyback off what Ryan said, this is what we're doing to help, and then going and making sure that the best athlete is out on the field?
Yeah, well, I mean, St. John's is where it all started for me, was like learning, sitting with Corey and you, and being able to like understand like what's happening on the mound and like what is true rotation, like what does pelvic rotation look like what does T-spine rotation look like how do you teach that, like being able to understand what that is, and then being able to like backtrack and be able to get to the situation that you need to be in. But like, and just watching the game, being around the game, I think is super important and a super lost art. I think right now it's super common to be like, oh, well, I'm this sports performance coach who's also a pitching coach. It's like, well, no, you're not. You're a performance coach who thinks you're a pitching coach. And then you got people over here who think, they can go do both as well. And it's like being able to watch the game, and you watch this guy like all the time. You can turn on any major league game and you'll see somebody who's competing at the highest level in the world who cannot produce power rotationally. Like guys are getting into lumbar extension, they're flying open early, but they're winning and they're competing. So it's like, all right, it's rotational power. Like number one, what is rotational power? And like, to me, it's efficient movement and like being able to sequence from the ground and like putting force into the ground, and then basically being able, I'll say this a different way, being able to step on the gas and then be able to step on the brake. And if there ain't no brake pedal there, you ain't stepping on no brakes, and you ain't throwing the ball fast, and you're not hitting the ball fast, which to Isaac's point earlier, you're not getting paid, you're not getting picked up by a big league club. So being able to do what needs to be done at the time that it needs to be done, that's the name of the game. Can you apply the rate that, the force at the rate that it needs to be applied, like within the sequence that it needs to be done? So like rotational power is awesome. And I think it's so much fun to train. But if you have a kid, again, that has 10 to 12 degrees of internal external rotation on their back hip and they're a right-handed hitter, they're going to sway, they're going to slide. Like they're not going to be able to get into that. It's like, so it's going to be more linear. It's going to be linear power. It's not actually rotational power. So I think being able to, again, Ryan, nailed it. Being able to look at what is actually going on. And when the coach comes up and says, hey, like they can't get into their hips or they can't do this. And you're like, yes, we know, we're working on this. Give us this amount of time to be able to allow that athlete to go and do what you want, or you guys are just going to bang your heads together and no results going to come. And then everybody's going to be frustrated. And then the performance department's going to be the one that gets blamed because they can't internally externally rotate at the back hip. So just having that communication and taking your time with it, but also having like the real expectation of this part's our job from the movement general quality standpoint, but it's also our job to be able to look at it from a baseball side of things and say like, all right, well, that's not pelvic rotation, because the majority of the pitching coaches, like even at the highest levels, like they know what looks good. They know what metrics looks good. They know what grips look good. They know how to get their players to be able to achieve the highest standards and go compete for World Series, but they may not be able to see movement the way that we can. Like the five of us can go watch a bullpen with some of the best pitching coaches on the planet, and we're going to see and say, the most important thing here is like, we're going to say different things. We're going to say, oh, he can't get into his back hip. Like, did you see how that frontal stability in the back hip, like the back ankle's not there? Like, they're just going to be like, oh, well, like, looks like he was, falling off glove side. Like, that's great. But like, why was he falling off glove side? Like, we have to understand that. And we have to almost be the bridge there to show them like, all right, yes, this is a general quality or this is a baseball quality. And like, that's what's super cool about professional baseball right now is they have people in those positions to be able to bridge those gaps and talk that talk and really get both sides working together. So it's not a, one size fit all kind of deal.
Isaac, really, really quick to you, to that point, like with the position that you're in, is that, facilitation of conversation happen a lot within your role? And pushing forward and
No.
making sure that everybody's on the same page, even verbally. Correct terminology. Hey, what are our key words that we need to make sure that we're on the same page?
Yeah, no doubt. My role gets to be the messenger for our department across our organization. So we get to interact with all parts of the organization and its leadership, which provides visibility and clarity of what's important to them and how we can make an impact in the development space. Ultimately, there's so many measurables on field that we can identify if it's an issue or if it's something we need to acquire or if it's something that we look to develop. So we can look at all of the tracings of performance over time through years and years of data. We get help that way. And then like we talked about, we can go down our checklist and use our biomechanics team to figure out, is it a skill acquisition, a sequencing thing? Is it a strength thing? So there's lots of ways to chop it up. We're not there yet. There's not a lot of clubs who are there yet. We're getting better at it because we're getting better at talking to each other. So that's super important. So I don't think there's a team that has the answer. Otherwise, they'd be way ahead of us and win every World Series ever. So that's my answer to that one. I'm sure it's not a great one, but sitting in the chair that I have now and not having one group of 35 guys every day that I get to teach and coach, that gives you an opportunity to do that too.
Appreciate everyone's feedback on that for sure. And I think one of the things that really hits home is just the communication piece. We've heard that in a lot of the answers, and the ability to communicate, not just coach to coach, but coach to athlete and so on. So obviously we can place a lot of importance on that. Just kind of a quicker question here. There's been a lot of debate on this topic over the years. I don't even say debate, just conversation. But I'm going to get a little bit specific with this scenario. We have a starting pitcher. It's mid-season. Let's assume they had a normal start, which we would say is like 5 to 7 innings, 85 plus pitches in the start. We'll call that day zero, right? Their start day is day zero. What does day one look like for this athlete in terms of the work that they're going to be doing in the weight room or on the field? I would love to know the answer, either what you've previously done. I know it may depend on that individual, but where's our general principles lie in terms of answering what that day one looks like? And anyone who's willing to give it a shot to start, go ahead.
Nice. I'll start. Gabe, it depends, man. You know that. Like, it depends. There are lots of ways to confirm, whether your prescription from day one, or we call it day one or day zero, leading up to the start, is productive, right? You talk to the athlete. Are they prepared? Do they feel prepared? Is the outing good? You have all these metrics that can indicate whether your intervention or methods of intervention was productive, start over start, week over week, and month over month. So if you're smart, you make adjustments based on the confirmation of the information, right? So initially, I think the safest way is just reset everything, right? Get everything calm down and get back to neutral. I think whatever that means for you, whether that's a movement flow, whether that's parasympathetic work, that's a hot word. I don't really know how to do that and say like you're in parasympathetic mode, but that's a buzzword. But there's confirmation with tools, physiological tools, performance measurements to say like, are we repeating those things week after week, and are those things that we're repeating leading to productive performances? So I think that's another crappy answer, but I think that's a systematic way to do it. There's some confirmation objectively and subjectively to do it that way too. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that one.
Yeah, I think like I'll jump in. On top of that, it's all about like how you develop like the systems, and Isaac, you guys have probably done this already, but like having the systems in place of, all right, this is what it looks like, and we're going to give our coaches and we're going to empower our coaches to go make that it depends decision, and that's to me like what the biggest thing is like there's no absolutes in this game, and as soon as somebody says like, hey, we're going to do this and this is like how we roll, like they're probably already left behind. And to Isaac's point, like they're probably not the ones competing for World Series or even national championships. So like being able to have the thought process of, okay, this is my perfect world. If I could do this with this person, great. but we know the game of baseball is not a perfect world, and it's going to rear its ugly head and put us in our place. So being able to be reactive with plan A and like plan B, C, D, E, all the way down, being as close to plan A as possible, like that's to me like where I found the most success. And also like the older the players get, the more experience they have, like giving them the autonomy to say like, hey, here are some options here, like what do you feel? Because that's where like I think you make it their own, you make it their program. It's not our program, it's they're the ones doing it. We just wrote it on a piece of paper or a cool little piece of technology we're flashing on an app. So like giving it to them and allowing them to take hold of it, that's where again, I know I keep talking about the art and like the stuff that we can't see and we can't touch, but like that's, if you look at any aspect of sport, it's like, oh, they just had it. They had like that person has it. Well, what is it? It is their ability to like be bought into what they're doing and compete at the highest level every single night. And you cannot work with grown men and like not give them the autonomy. Like they have to have autonomy. They have to have thought processes. And then it again turns back to that relationship of we guide them where we want them to go. And at the end of the day, like we're the coaches, but depending on the level you're at, like being able to let them have some input is huge on that aspect of things.
Yeah, Isaac, this felt like the most it depends answer out of like most baseball questions. So that almost pushed me to being like, I have to ask it because there are so many different ways and approaches to this on this day one. And I think, Ryan hit on it a little bit earlier and you just did again, putting a lot of value into that subjective piece of it. And Brandon just talked about it as well there, giving these people choices, giving these players options and choices and having autonomy and really asking them, okay, how are you feeling? What's going on? And making adjustments from there. So appreciate that. Ryan, if you have anything to answer on top of that, maybe something that you did when you were with Stanford or Baylor or something that's going on now, feel free to.
Yeah, I've definitely been on both sides of the coin where I've said, okay, day one, like you're the furthest day out from your next competition. Like we're just going to hammer lower body. And if you're sore, I don't care. And then I've been on the side of like, okay, I understand. Like, yes, you just threw 100 pitches. You probably need, you're the Friday night starter. So you get less time because you're up until 2 a.m. because you're still jacked from last night's win or loss, whichever one. And you come in the next day. Like I understand there might need to be a reason to, as Isaac put it, do a parasympathetic reset, just get a guy to calm down and understand like there's such a long runway when you're at least on a 7-day rotation to get work in that you can push that out to like a 48-hour window from to them. What is the highest level of competition and the highest stress level they're going to go through the week? Because that's when they're out there on the mound for the longest and competing. So I think, just to echo what both of these two coaches said, like being able to take in the input from the athletes of, hey, what makes you feel good on that next day? And if you get a chance to, in my later years, being able to take the fall ball schedule with those starters and just kind of play around and tweak with, hey, let's try this week and see how you feel. And talk to me about like after your pen the next day when you come in, or match day -3, whatever that is for your pen. Let's talk about how you felt during that. Okay, next week let's try this and see if someone's open to that, or if they have any input themselves of like, hey, I really liked this, and then I didn't really like that as much. I didn't feel like that benefited me, and then you can kind of make it their own and just help guide them through the process. And that's kind of all I feel like we are at the end of the day. Is really just kind of teachers and guides to help these kids understand, as they matriculate through the levels of baseball and hopefully get to that highest level. Can we just play a small part in helping them establish what their routines are so that they can get into a really good groove and a rhythm that follows them throughout the levels, so that they can always like kind of come back and center themselves to be like, regardless of what the outcome is, I can control the process, and my process I feel very confident in, so I can go out there and compete. And if I don't have my greatest day, that's okay. I'm going to trust my process and to go out there and hopefully in the long run, and especially in a game of averages like baseball is, my average will come out in a better position than my opponent.
Well, speaking of routines and getting that feedback from players and giving the autonomy of a player to kind of pick their process and routine. And we know a lot of baseballs need to have their routine. So with that being said, there's a ton of different interesting exercises that a lot of players bring to the forefront because they need to do it on a daily basis because it makes them feel some type of way. So I guess with that being said, from a the psychological aspect of a practitioner, we get that to a degree. So how often do we leverage nature's medicine cabinet without letting the athlete take it too far? Like, hey, we understand that this is part of your routine. Maybe it's a little safety blanket or security blanket, but to what point to then, hey, we need to step in and educate because this isn't quite working. And Brandon, I'll go to you first. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think anytime there's like any detriment or it's going against what we're trying to accomplish and who they are as a person, I think that's where you step in and you have that conversation. Like, for example, if they're somebody who needs to acquire maximal strength to bring that threshold where it needs to be from a power standpoint, like, and they're out there running a bunch and they need to run a lot and they need to do a bunch of volume in the gym, and they're never actually touching loads that are going to allow the force side of the things to be illicit. I think that's where you have the conversation. But at the end of the day, it also depends. To me, it's like the age of the player as well. Like, some of these guys behind me, like, they're definitely not in the same position that some of the guys were that I had in pro ball, where it's like, hey, let's have a conversation, and like, here's exactly kind of what we're going to do. Like, on the flip side of that, like, I teach these guys like 16, 17, 18-year-olds the same way that I would like some of the older guys, like, but it's just a different thought process of where they're at and like educating them where they are on their journey. And then again, empowering them to fulfill whatever journey it is that they want and have them know like, hey, I got your back no matter what, man. Like, if you want to get better at this, like, here's what I think is the best. Like, what do you think's the best? And if they have a thought process, great, we'll have a conversation. But if they don't, they're like, hey, B, I trust you. Let's go get after it. Like, let's push until we need to kind of rethink that process. But I think there's guys in the big leagues that probably do a whole lot of weird shit, and you got to let them do it. Like, they're big leaguers for a reason, and I'm not going to go tell some of those guys making $300 million that they can't do their weird thing and be the first one on the chopping block. So I think it just depends.
Isaac, any input from your perspective?
Yeah, I got some opinions. I come back to the idea of development, and all of us are collegiate strength and conditioning coaches, and we got players that never have been in the weight room or know how to work. So I think it's very, very important that doesn't get misconstrued, that we just let our players pick and choose like whatever they want. Regardless of all of the physiological metrics, they didn't sleep well, they didn't eat well, they need to learn how to work, right? So that those indicators start to play up. They learn from their experiences that they'll have better outputs from better lifestyle, nutritional habits, and all those things. So one of my mentors, he's the director of basketball at the University of Miami, Preston Green. I just listened to him talk, and he, some of the roadblocks that he had with like wearable technologies and getting tons of data on players, like ultimately it didn't matter anymore. Like, still teaching 17-year-old, 18-year-old players like how to use this for your routine. This is your work, how to learn how to work smart, and then work consistently. That's the foundation piece to get to the conversations that are productive about what do you want to do today and what do you need today. So for young coaches out there, like, that's important. That's the mindset that's important. Your tactic and your communication method and your style, in order for people to hear you and appreciate you, that's super important. If you want to be a good coach and you want to make it, that comes down to caring about people, being a good person, not being an idiot. So yeah.
Love it. People industry, got to build those relationships in order to make that influence. Ryan, anything to wrap it up in regards to that question?
Yeah, I'll just kind of piggyback off of one of the things that Brandon said. It's just kind of having a pulse to know which of your athletes can you give more autonomy and which you can. Like, if Johnny's a mature, not only just from a physical perspective, but like from a mental and emotional perspective, and he can handle a little bit more freedom, sure, he can earn that through the process. But if Timmy over there, who, to Isaac's point, like, he doesn't sleep, he doesn't eat, like, he doesn't, do all the things off the field that you can trust him with. And I'm probably not going to give him a whole lot of options when he comes into the weight room, because he's going to take a little bit more of a narrow pathway, because I understand the things that he needs more than he probably does at that point. So I think just, yeah, knowing where they are in their journey, kind of where they are from a maturity standpoint will kind of help you guide those decisions a little bit more appropriately.
Love it. Before I flick it over to Gabe, I just want to say thanks. I appreciate your guys' time. A lot of good insight here, and a really nice approach to attacking training within baseball. So thanks again. Appreciate you guys being on. Gabe, over to you to wrap it up. Thank you.
Brandon, we've been doing this for about 8 months. You easily have the best background of anybody over the course of those 8 months. You just got, and for people who are listening on audio, he's got guys lifting in the background right now. It's awesome. They're squatting and going in. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
Gabe, let me chime in really quick. I was going to save this for later, but Brandon, tell Big Hoss that he doesn't need to look at the camera every time he gets under the barbell. We see him back there. All right. What is that? 225 or left? All right. Relax.
Michael, I can't let you do that to my boy. He split squat 315 the other night at 0.77 and he's 16. So if you want to jump in a plane and come do it with him, you're welcome to.
Give me a flight out. I'm there.
He eats your shit, buddy.
Yeah, that was awesome. I just appreciate that. And it's a great thing to be seeing in the background while we're talking about training. So thank you. Last question. It's a fun one. It's something we ask all of our guest panelists who join us on the K.E.S. What does your own training look like right now? Is it practice what you preach? Are you training for anything specific, experimenting, just trying to survive? What's going on? Do you guys give us a little bit of insight, a little quick hitter on what's happening with your own training? And we'll start with Isaac, head over to Ryan, and we'll finish it up with Brandon.
This is our first off season being able to map out like our method for off season training. We mapped out a GPP phase of 11 weeks and an SPP phase of 9 weeks. Like undulating periodization, like good methods for training. And so like myself, I'll speak a little bit for Tibbets. I've seen him in the gym doing it. We all kind of jump in and do the program. Like that's it. Like we want to learn how to train and collectively learn the principles. Like all our coaches that are in Arizona, they're complex. Like they're doing the program. We didn't make them do the program. We kind of sold it with a smile and a how about you try. But they're learning some of our thought process for training, and then we get to talk about training. I think that's really, really cool. We get to be in the same environment in the gym at the same time and get to talk shop and pick each other's brains. And that's been really, really productive. So it's always a little bit harder when you're in an administrative role that you're not on the floor every single day, but we make sure that we encourage each other and we get it in.
That was the first person to mention practice what you preach, I think, Mike, right? First staff Milwaukee Brewers, practice what you preach. So thanks for that answer. Ryan, how's that training been going for you, having to be one of those individuals who's in there? What's been your favorite part about it?
So I will say there is definitely an asterisk with me following the program, and mine gets heavily modified most days. So I've got a 6-month-old son, and I kind of tacked on. So in a 2-month time period, he was born. I moved halfway across the country with my family and started a new job altogether. So things were kind of a whirlwind for a while there. So I still kind of hang back and sit in the GPP phase, and I don't really progress too much out of that. And most of the times it's going upper body only anyways. Mixing in some cardio now, trying to help myself out in the new year a little bit.
Yeah, it's been fun to listen to a lot of the people we've had on. Obviously, we've known a couple of them for some time, and a lot of them now have kids or new parents. So seeing how that influences their own training seems to have a very heavy influence on it. So Brandon, we'll finish up with you there. What does your own training look like right now?
Yeah, similar, just rocking and rolling, similar to Ryan, not to our all-star over there, Isaac, but yeah, just trying to get my stuff, rocking and rolling. I got my Stairmaster back there, trying to get a little less fat and just getting my work in, and then trying to get strong again. Maybe I can get strong like I used to be, relatively to me. But yeah, man, just trying to do it, have fun, play around with these guys every once in a while. But yeah, just trying to get strong and not be a lard ass.
Well said.
Yeah, well said. So that's all the time we have for tonight. A big thank you to our 3 panelists, Coach Golden, Coach Tibbets, and Coach Salazar. These are 3 individuals that are passionate about human performance and the game of baseball, and we're grateful to spend some time with them. Please be sure to give them all a follow on social media. Brandon, you can follow on Twitter and Instagram at Coach B Golden. Isaac, you can follow on Twitter at isalazar_3. And Ryan, you can follow on Twitter at Coach_Tibbets. This discussion will be publicly available on the Keiser Fitness YouTube page, and the audio will be up on Spotify as well under Keiser Education Series. Thank you and have a great night.